The telegram arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in October 1882, informing Maeve Norton that her husband had died in a mining accident near Leadville, and that she had exactly 1 week to vacate the company housing before they reassigned it to another family. She was 5 months pregnant, her belly just beginning to show beneath her worn calico dress, and she had nowhere to go except back to her husband's family ranch outside Trinidad, Colorado, where his mother had made it abundantly clear 2 years earlier that Maeve was nothing but a fortune-hunting opportunist who had trapped her beloved son into marriage. The journey south took 3 days by stage, each jolt and bump reminding her of the life growing inside her. And when she finally arrived at the sprawling ranch with its whitewashed fences and herds of cattle dotting the brown hills, clutching her single carpetbag and wearing her best dress that was still dusty from the road, she found Thomas Norton's mother waiting on the porch with arms crossed and lips pressed into a thin line. "You have some nerve showing up here," Catherine Norton said, her voice cold as mountain water. "My son is barely in the ground." Maeve's throat tightened. "Mrs. Norton, I have nowhere else to turn. The mining company has taken the house, and I have nothing but what I'm wearing and what's in this bag. I'm carrying Thomas's child, your grandchild." The older woman's eyes flickered to Maeve's stomach, then back to her face. "That child could be anyone's. Thomas wrote to me 2 months before he died. Said you'd been spending time with one of the other miners, a man from back east. He suspected the baby wasn't his." The words hit Maeve like a physical blow. "That's a lie. I never looked at another man. Thomas was everything to me." "My son didn't lie." Catherine descended the porch steps, her black mourning dress rustling. "Even if the child is his, I won't have you under my roof. You married him against my wishes, took him away from this ranch where he belonged, dragged him to those filthy mining camps. He'd be alive today if it weren't for you." "Please," Maeve whispered, hating herself for begging but desperate enough to try. "I'll work. I'll do anything. I can cook, clean, help with the ranch hands. I won't ask for charity." Catherine pulled an envelope from her pocket and thrust it at Maeve. "Here's $20. It's more than you deserve. Take it and leave this ranch before sundown. If you ever come back or try to claim this child has Norton blood, I'll tell everyone in Trinidad that you were unfaithful, that you're trying to pass off a bastard as legitimate. My family has standing in this territory, and no one will believe a widow with no money and no prospects over a Norton." Maeve took the envelope with shaking hands. The sun was already sinking toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that seemed to mock her desperation. She had no choice but to walk back toward Trinidad, the only town within 50 miles, though she had no idea what she would do when she got there. Her parents were both dead. Her sister had married and moved to San Francisco 3 years ago, and she'd lost touch with most of her friends after the wedding. Thomas had been her whole world, and now that world had collapsed into nothing. The walk into Trinidad took 2 hours. By the time she reached the main street with its false-fronted buildings and wooden sidewalks, her feet ached and her back throbbed. She passed the hotel first, but even without checking she knew $20 wouldn't last more than a few days if she paid for a room. The boarding house near the train depot had a sign advertising weekly rates, but the proprietress who answered the door took one look at Maeve's belly and shook her head. "I run a respectable establishment," the woman said. "I can't have unwed mothers under my roof." "I'm a widow," Maeve protested, showing the black armband she'd sewn onto her sleeve. "My husband died in a mining accident." The woman's expression didn't soften. "Maybe so, but I've got a reputation to maintain. Try the church." But the church was locked when Maeve arrived, and the priest's housekeeper who came to the door in response to her knocking informed her that Father O'Brien was visiting parishioners in the countryside and wouldn't return until Sunday. "Come back then," she said, not unkindly. "He might be able to help." Maeve stood on the church steps as darkness fell over Trinidad, watching lamps being lit in windows up and down the street. The October air carried a chill that promised an early winter. She wrapped her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders and tried to think. There was a bench outside the general store where she could rest for the night, though the thought of sleeping in public where anyone could see her made her cheeks burn with shame. But what choice did she have? She was walking toward the store when a voice called out from the shadows. "Madam, you look lost." Maeve turned to see a man emerging from the alley beside the livery stable. He was tall and lean, probably in his mid-20s, wearing dusty work clothes and a hat pushed back on his head. Even in the dim light from the street lamps, she could see the concern in his eyes. "I'm not lost," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt, "just looking for a place to stay." The man glanced at her carpetbag, then at her face. "The hotel's back that way." "I know where the hotel is." Maeve's voice came out sharper than she intended. "I'm sorry. It's been a long day." He studied her for a moment, and Maeve had the uncomfortable feeling he could see right through her brave facade to the scared, desperate woman underneath. "My name's Quincy Dalton," he said. "I work at the Rockingham Ranch about 5 miles north of here. You new to Trinidad?" "I'm Maeve Norton. I used to live here before I married." She hesitated, then decided there was no point in hiding the truth. "My husband died 3 weeks ago. I came back hoping to stay with his family, but they turned me away." Quincy's expression darkened. "The Norton Ranch." "Catherine Norton is meaner than a stepped-on rattlesnake. I'm sorry she did that to you." "It doesn't matter now. I just need to find somewhere to sleep until Sunday when the priest returns. I have some money, but not much." "You planning to sleep on that bench?" Maeve lifted her chin. "If I have to." Quincy was quiet for a long moment, then he seemed to come to a decision. "I've got a better idea. The Rockingham has a bunkhouse where the ranch hands sleep, but there's also an old storage room attached to the barn that's not being used for anything. It's got 4 walls and a roof, which is more than that bench can offer. Boss won't mind if I clean it out and put a cot in there. You could stay there until you figure out your next step." Maeve stared at him. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" "Because it's the right thing to do." He said it simply, as if there was no other answer possible. "And because no one should have to sleep on the street, especially not a woman in your condition." She felt heat flood her cheeks. "You noticed?" "Hard not to, madam, but that's your business, not mine. What matters is getting you somewhere safe for the night." Part of Maeve wanted to refuse out of pride. She barely knew this man, and accepting help from him felt like admitting defeat. But the larger, more practical part of her knew she had no other options. "Just for tonight," she said. "Until I can make other arrangements." "Sure," Quincy said, though something in his tone suggested he knew it wouldn't be just one night. "I've got my horse tied up by the saloon. Give me 10 minutes to fetch him, and I'll take you out to the ranch." He was back in 8 minutes, leading a sorrel gelding with a white blaze down its face. He helped Maeve into the saddle, then swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to hold the reins. She stiffened at the contact, but his touch was impersonal, careful not to press too close. "Hold on to the saddle horn," he instructed. "It's an easy ride, but there are some ruts in the road." They rode north through the darkness, the lights of Trinidad fading behind them. The moon was a bright silver dollar in the sky, illuminating the landscape in shades of gray and black. Mountains rose in jagged silhouettes to the west, and the air smelled of sage and dust and something else, something wild that Maeve had forgotten during her time in the cramped mining camps up north. "How long have you worked at the Rockingham?" she asked, partly to break the silence and partly because she wanted to know more about this stranger who was helping her. About 4 years. Came out from Kansas after my folks died of cholera. Didn't have any siblings, no other family to speak of, so I figured I'd try my luck out west. Ranching suits me better than farming ever did. Do you like it here? In Trinidad, it's home. She could hear the smile in his voice. Good people for the most part, good country. Winters can be harsh, but the rest of the year makes up for it. They fell silent again, the only sound the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves and the distant yip of a coyote. Maeve found herself relaxing despite everything, lulled by the motion of the ride and the surprising comfort of Quincy's presence behind her. He didn't press her with questions or make her feel like she had to explain herself. He was just helping, no strings attached, and that was something she hadn't experienced in longer than she could remember. The Rockingham Ranch house appeared in the distance, a low, sprawling structure with warm light glowing in the windows. Quincy guided the horse past it toward a large barn and several smaller outbuildings. He dismounted first, then helped Maeve down, his hand steady on her waist. "Wait here," he said. "I need to talk to the boss and get some supplies. Won't take long." He strode toward the ranch house while Maeve stood in the yard, clutching her carpetbag and trying not to feel like an intruder. The barn doors were open, and she could hear horses moving in their stalls, the comfortable sounds of animals settling for the night. A dog barked somewhere, then went quiet. Quincy returned 15 minutes later carrying a lantern, a bundle of blankets, and what looked like a pillow under one arm. "Boss says it's fine," he reported. "His wife Sarah wants to meet you tomorrow, but she understands you're probably exhausted tonight. Come on, I'll show you the room." He led her around the side of the barn to a small structure she hadn't noticed before. It was attached to the barn but had its own door and window. Inside, it was dusty and cluttered with old tack, broken tools, and stacks of empty crates, but Quincy had been right about it having 4 walls and a roof. The ceiling was high enough that she could stand upright, and the window, though grimy, let in moonlight. "Give me about half an hour," Quincy said, setting down his load. "I'll move all this junk to another shed and sweep the place out. There's a cot in the bunkhouse we're not using that I can bring over." "I can help," Maeve offered, but he shook his head. "You're dead on your feet. Just rest outside where the air's clear. I'll handle this." She wanted to argue, but her body was betraying her, exhaustion making her limbs feel like lead. She sat on an overturned bucket outside the door and watched as Quincy worked. He moved with efficient purpose, carrying out the clutter, sweeping clouds of dust from the corners, wiping down the single window until it sparkled in the lantern light. Then he disappeared and came back with a simple wooden cot, a thin mattress, and a small table with a chipped ceramic basin and pitcher. "Water's in the pump by the barn," he said, showing her where it was. "Privy's over there behind those cottonwoods. Breakfast is at 6 in the main house, but Sarah said to tell you to sleep as late as you need. She'll put aside a plate for you." Maeve looked at the little room, transformed in less than an hour from a junk-filled shed into something resembling actual living quarters. Her throat tightened with emotion. "Mr. Dalton, I don't know how to thank you, Quincy," he corrected gently. "And you don't need to thank me, just get some rest." He paused at the door. "Lock's broken on this, but I'll sleep in the barn tonight instead of the bunkhouse. No one will bother you." Before she could protest that he didn't need to give up his own bed for her sake, he was gone, his footsteps fading into the night. Maeve stood in the doorway of her new shelter, looking at the cot with its pile of blankets, the table with its basin, the swept floor and clean window. It wasn't much, but after the day she'd had, it felt like a palace. She washed her face and hands with water from the pump, then returned to the little room and locked the door from the inside with a chair wedged under the handle, since the actual lock was broken, as Quincy had said. She changed into her nightdress, folded her clothes carefully on the table, and climbed into the cot. The mattress was thin and the blankets rough, but they were clean and warm. Through the window, she could see stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet, and somewhere in the darkness, a night bird called. For the first time since receiving the telegram about Thomas's death, Maeve allowed herself to cry. She cried for her husband, for the life they'd planned together that would never happen now. She cried for the baby growing inside her who would never know its father. She cried for her own fear and uncertainty, for the humiliation of being turned away by Catherine Norton, for the exhaustion and desperation that had brought her to this moment. But underneath, the grief and fear was something else, something small but persistent: gratitude. A stranger had shown her kindness when she needed it most. He had given her shelter without asking for anything in return, had treated her with respect and dignity when others had turned her away. It was a tiny spark of hope in what had seemed like endless darkness, and as Maeve finally drifted into sleep, she held onto that spark like a lifeline. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of roosters crowing. For a disoriented moment, she didn't know where she was. Then memory flooded back and she sat up quickly, wincing at the protest from her stiff muscles. The room looked different in daylight, shabby but serviceable, and through the window she could see the ranch coming to life. Men were heading toward the barn, horses were being led to the corrals, and smoke rose from the chimney of the main house. Maeve dressed quickly, braided her hair, and splashed water on her face. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. She was trying to decide if she should walk up to the main house when a knock came at the door. "Mrs. Norton, it's Sarah Mitchell, the ranch owner's wife. May I come in?" Maeve opened the door to find a woman in her early 40s with kind eyes and graying brown hair pulled back in a practical bun. She carried a covered basket that smelled of fresh bread and bacon. "I thought you might be hungry," Sarah said with a warm smile. "Quincy told us a bit about your situation last night. I'm so sorry for your loss." "Thank you." Maeve stepped aside to let Sarah enter, suddenly self-conscious about the sparse room. "And thank you for letting me stay here. I promise I won't impose for long." Sarah set the basket on the table and began unpacking it, revealing not just food but also a bar of soap, a hand towel, and a small sachet that smelled of lavender. "Quincy said you might need a few things. The soap is homemade, nothing fancy, but it's good for washing up. The towel is extra, we have plenty, and I thought the lavender might help you sleep better." Maeve felt tears prick her eyes at the simple generosity. "I don't deserve this kindness from strangers." "Nonsense." Sarah's voice was firm but gentle. "Everyone deserves kindness, especially when they're going through hard times. Now sit down and eat before the food gets cold. We need to talk about your situation." Maeve sat on the edge of the cot while Sarah pulled up the single chair. The food was simple but delicious. Bacon, fresh bread with butter, scrambled eggs, and even a small jar of preserves. She tried to eat slowly to maintain some dignity, but her hunger won out and she devoured everything in the basket. "When is the baby due?" Sarah asked, her eyes on Maeve's belly. "Late February or early March, I think. I'm about 5 months along." Sarah nodded. "And you have no family who can help you?" "My parents are dead. My sister lives in California, but we haven't spoken in years. My husband's family." She trailed off, not wanting to repeat what Catherine Norton had said. "I know Catherine Norton," Sarah said quietly. "She's a hard woman. I'm sorry she turned you away when you needed help. She thinks the baby isn't her son's." Maeve heard the bitterness in her own voice. It is, but she won't believe me. She gave me $20 and told me to leave. Sarah's lips pressed together in a thin line of disapproval. Well, she's not here and we are. Here's what I propose. You stay in this room for as long as you need. In exchange, once you're feeling stronger, you can help around the ranch. I could use another pair of hands in the kitchen, and there's always mending to be done, vegetables to preserve, that sort of thing. Nothing too strenuous, especially not in your condition. Does that sound fair? Maeve stared at her. You're offering me work, a place to stay. I'm offering you a chance to get back on your feet. The room isn't much, but Quincy tells me you're resourceful. We can make it more comfortable over time, and when the baby comes, we'll figure that out too. Why? The question burst out before Maeve could stop it. Why are you being so kind to me? You don't know anything about me. Sarah smiled. I know you've lost your husband and you're carrying a child. I know you walked all the way to Trinidad yesterday and didn't give up even when you had nowhere to go. I know Quincy Dalton vouched for you, and that young man has better judgment than most people twice his age. That's enough for me. I don't know what to say except thank you. Maeve's voice was thick with emotion. I'll work hard, I promise. I won't let you down. I believe you. Sarah stood and smoothed her skirts. Take today to rest and get settled. Tomorrow you can come up to the house after breakfast and I'll show you around. Oh, and Quincy left you something. She pointed to the corner where Maeve now noticed a small stack of items. A lantern, extra blankets, a rag rug for the floor, and a wooden box. Sarah lifted the lid of the box to reveal basic supplies. Matches, candles, a hairbrush, a small sewing kit, and a book. He gathered these from around the ranch this morning, Sarah explained. Said you might need them. After Sarah left, Maeve examined each item like it was a treasure. The book was a collection of poems by Longfellow, its pages worn from many readings. The hairbrush was simple but serviceable. The rag rug, when she spread it on the floor beside the cot, added a splash of color to the drab room. And the knowledge that Quincy had spent his morning thinking about what she might need, gathering these small comforts without being asked, made something warm unfurl in her chest. She didn't see Quincy that day. She spent the afternoon organizing her meager belongings, washing her spare dress in the basin, and reading the Longfellow poems while sitting on the overturned bucket outside her door. The October sunshine was warm on her face, and for the first time in weeks, she felt something other than despair. Not happiness exactly, but a tentative sense that maybe, just maybe, she would survive this. That night she lay in her cot listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for sleep. Horses nickered in the barn, an owl hooted from the cottonwoods, and somewhere a harmonica played a lonely tune. She thought about Quincy sleeping in the barn instead of the bunkhouse so she would feel safe. She thought about Sarah's immediate acceptance and practical kindness. These people were strangers who owed her nothing, yet they had given her more than her own family had. She placed her hand on her belly, feeling the small flutter of movement that had started a few weeks ago. "We're going to be all right," she whispered to the baby. "I promise you, we're going to be all right." The next morning, Maeve presented herself at the ranch house kitchen at 7, dressed in her cleanest dress with her hair pinned up neatly. Sarah was already at work preparing breakfast for the ranch hands, and she put Maeve to work immediately slicing bread and setting out plates. The routine was familiar and comforting, and Maeve fell into the rhythm easily. The ranch hands trooped in at 7:30, a dozen men ranging from teenagers to grizzled veterans. They nodded politely to Maeve when Sarah introduced her as Mrs. Norton, who will be helping out around here for a while, but she could see the curiosity in their eyes. Quincy came in with the last group, and when his gaze met hers across the crowded kitchen, He smiled. It was a small smile, nothing bold or presumptuous, just a simple acknowledgement that she was there, and he was glad to see her looking better than she had 2 nights ago. Maeve found herself smiling back before she could think better of it. After breakfast, Sarah showed her around the ranch. The main house was comfortable but not fancy, built for function rather than show. There was a large kitchen, a dining room that doubled as a sitting room, 3 bedrooms, and a small office where Sarah's husband John managed the ranch accounts. Outside were the barn, the bunkhouse, several storage sheds, a chicken coop, a smokehouse, and extensive corrals where cattle and horses milled about. "We run about 500 head of cattle," Sarah explained as they walked. "Plus we breed horses for sale. It keeps everyone busy, especially during calving season and roundup. John's out with the men right now checking on the herds in the far pastures. He'll be back for supper and he'll want to meet you then." They spent the rest of the morning in the kitchen, where Sarah taught Maeve her system for managing meals for a ranch full of hungry men. There was bread to bake, beans to soak for dinner, vegetables from the root cellar to prepare, and endless dishes to wash. Maeve threw herself into the work, grateful for the distraction and the purpose. At lunch, Quincy appeared at the kitchen door with an armload of firewood. "Where do you want this, Mrs. Mitchell?" "By the stove, thank you, Quincy." Sarah wiped her hands on her apron. "Have you eaten?" "Yes, madam." Cookie made stew out at the line camp. He stacked the wood neatly, then glanced at Maeve. "How are you settling in, Mrs. Norton?" "Very well, thank you." She was suddenly aware of the flour dusting her sleeves and the strand of hair that had escaped her bun. "The room is perfect. And thank you for the supplies. That was very thoughtful." He ducked his head, looking almost shy. "It wasn't anything special, just some odds and ends. It was special to me." Their eyes met and held for a moment longer than necessary. Sarah, watching this exchange with interest, cleared her throat. "Quincy, Mrs. Norton's door lock is broken. Do you think you could fix it today?" "Already got a new lock from the hardware shed," he said. "I'll install it this afternoon." "Good man." Sarah shooed him toward the door. "Now go on before Cookie wonders where you've disappeared to." After he left, Sarah turned to Maeve with a knowing smile. "He's a good one, that Quincy Dalton. Best worker we have. Never complains, always helps out where he's needed, treats everyone with respect. And he's single, in case you were wondering." Maeve felt her cheeks warm. "I'm a widow, Mrs. Mitchell. It wouldn't be appropriate to think about such things. You're a young woman with a whole life ahead of you. There's no shame in noticing when a good man does kind things." Sarah's voice was gentle. "I'm not suggesting anything improper. I'm just saying don't close yourself off to possibilities. You never know what the future might hold." That afternoon, Maeve returned to her little room to find Quincy installing the new lock on her door. He worked with steady competence, fitting the pieces together and testing the mechanism until it worked smoothly. "There," he said, demonstrating how it latched from the inside. "Good and sturdy. You'll be safe as houses now. Thank you." Maeve hesitated, then added, "You've been very kind to me, Quincy. I want you to know I appreciate it." He straightened, wiping his hands on his pants. "Like I said before, it's just the right thing to do. Maybe, but not everyone would do it. Catherine Norton certainly didn't." His expression hardened at the mention of the Norton Ranch. "I heard stories about that place, about how Catherine treats people she thinks are beneath her. Her son Thomas was a decent fellow from what I remember, but he got away from here as soon as he could. I'm sorry for what happened to him, and I'm sorry his mother treated you so poorly. Did you know him?" "Thomas." "A little. We were in school together when we were kids, before his family made their money and got all high and mighty. He was a year older than me, but we played baseball together sometimes." Quincy's voice was kind. "He seemed like a good man." "He was. Maeve's hand went unconsciously to her belly. He was excited about the baby. We'd been trying for over a year, and when I finally got pregnant, he was so happy. He wanted to save enough money to buy a little piece of land, start our own ranch. That's why he went to work in the mines, even though he hated it. He was trying to give us a future. Sounds like he loved you very much. He did. Her voice caught. And I loved him. I still do. I don't know how to stop. Quincy was quiet for a moment, then he said, I lost someone too. 3 years ago. Her name was Emily. We were engaged to be married, but she got sick with pneumonia that winter and died before the wedding. For a long time, I thought I'd never feel anything again except empty, but it gets easier. Not better exactly, but easier. You learn to carry the grief instead of letting it carry you. Maeve looked at him with new understanding. I'm sorry for your loss, and I'm sorry for yours. He picked up his tools. If you ever need to talk, or if there's anything I can do to make things easier, you just let me know. I mean that. I will, thank you. After he left, Maeve sat on her cot and thought about what he'd said. The idea that grief could become easier to carry, that she might someday feel something other than this crushing weight of loss, seemed impossible. But Quincy had survived his loss and built a new life. Maybe she could too. The days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Maeve woke early and went to the main house to help Sarah prepare breakfast. She learned to cook for large groups, to manage the endless cycle of dishes and laundry, to preserve vegetables and meat for the winter. Sarah was a patient teacher, and Maeve discovered she had a talent for organization and efficiency that made the work smoother. The ranch hands accepted her presence without question. They were polite, respectful, and careful not to crowd her or make her uncomfortable. A few of them, the younger ones, tried to flirt tentatively until Sarah shut that down with a few sharp words about respecting a widow in mourning. After that, they treated her like a sister, friendly but keeping their distance, except Quincy. He didn't flirt, but he was always there when she needed something. When the bucket she used to carry water from the pump developed a leak, he fixed it. When the October winds turned cold and she shivered in her thin shawl, he brought her a wool coat that had belonged to his mother. When she mentioned missing fresh vegetables, he brought her carrots and turnips from the root cellar. These small acts of kindness accumulated like coins in a bank, building something between them that neither of them had words for yet. John Mitchell turned out to be a bear of a man with a booming laugh and a soft heart. He welcomed Maeve to the ranch with genuine warmth, told her she could stay as long as she needed, and made it clear that anyone who had a problem with a pregnant widow living on his property could take it up with him personally. No one did. October turned into November, and the days grew shorter and colder. Maeve's belly swelled noticeably, and she had to let out the seams on her dresses. Sarah gave her fabric and helped her sew new dresses with room for her expanding body, and they spent several evenings by the fire working on baby clothes. It felt strange to prepare for the baby without Thomas, but also necessary. The child was coming whether Maeve was ready or not. She often found herself watching Quincy when he came to the house for meals or to do chores. He moved with an easy grace, comfortable in his own skin, and he had a way of making everyone around him feel at ease. The other ranch hands clearly respected him, often deferring to his judgment even though he wasn't a foreman. And he was unfailingly kind, not just to Maeve but to everyone. One cold November evening, Maeve was walking back to her room after dinner when she heard someone playing the harmonica. She followed the sound to find Quincy sitting on a fence rail near the barn, his face tilted toward the stars as he played a mournful melody. "That's beautiful," she said when he paused between songs. "What is it?" He turned, not startled by her presence. "Just an old tune my father used to play. I don't know if it has a name." Your father played the harmonica, taught me when I was 8 years old. It's one of the few things I have left from him. He looked down at the small instrument in his hands. Music helps sometimes when I'm thinking too much. What are you thinking about tonight? He was quiet for a long moment, then he said, about how strange life is. How you can be going along in one direction and then everything changes in an instant. How plans don't mean much when fate has other ideas. Are you talking about Emily? Partly. And other things. He slid off the fence to stand beside her. Can I ask you something personal? You can ask. I might not answer. Fair enough. He turned to face her. What are you going to do after the baby's born? Have you thought that far ahead? Maeve wrapped her arms around herself, partly for warmth and partly for comfort. I try not to think about it too much because it's terrifying. I have no money except what's left of the $20 Catherine gave me. I have no family. I can't work and care for a newborn at the same time. The logical thing would be to find a man to marry, someone who needs a wife and won't mind taking on another man's child, but the thought of marrying someone I don't love, someone who isn't Thomas. She shook her head. I don't know if I can do that. You don't have to decide anything right now. But I will have to decide eventually. The Mitchells are generous, but I can't live in that room forever. Quincy was quiet, and in the silence Maeve could hear the wind rustling through the last leaves on the cottonwoods, the distant lowing of cattle, the creak of the barn door swinging on its hinges. Then he said, "What if you didn't have to leave? What if you could stay here in that room or maybe a better one and just keep helping Sarah like you've been doing? Charity, you mean?" "No, not charity. A job. A real position on the ranch. Sarah told John just yesterday that she doesn't know how she managed before you came. You're making her life easier and that's worth something. Worth room and board for me and a baby." Maeve shook her head. "That's too much to ask. Maybe let them decide what's too much." His voice was gentle. "The Mitchells are good people. They're not going to throw you out when the baby comes, and if they need convincing, I'll help convince them." "Why?" She turned to face him fully. "Why do you care so much about what happens to me?" He met her eyes steadily. "Because you deserve better than what life's handed you lately. Because you work hard and you're brave and you're trying your best in an impossible situation. Because I know what it's like to lose everything and have to start over." He paused. "And because I like you, Maeve. I like talking to you. I like seeing you smile when Sarah tells one of her stories. I like knowing you're here." Is that honest enough? Maeve's heart hammered in her chest. She knew she should step back, should remind him and herself that she was a widow in mourning, that it was far too soon to think about such things. But she couldn't make herself do it. The truth was she liked him too. She liked his quiet strength, his steady presence, his kindness that never expected anything in return. She liked the way he said her name and the way he looked at her like she mattered. "It's too soon," she whispered. "Thomas has only been gone 2 months. I know, I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that you're not alone. Whatever happens, whatever you decide, you have a friend here. A friend. That was safe, acceptable." Maeve nodded slowly. "I'd like that. I'd like to be friends." "Good." He smiled at her, and even in the darkness she could see the warmth in his expression. "Now you should get inside before you freeze. That coat's warm, but you're still shivering." He was right. She'd been standing in the cold too long and her teeth were starting to chatter. "Good night, Quincy." "Good night, Maeve." She walked back to her room, but before she went inside she looked back to see him still standing by the fence, watching to make sure she made it safely. Something in her chest loosened, some tight knot of fear and loneliness she'd been carrying since Thomas died. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. November slid into December, bringing snow and bitter cold. Maeve's room, which had been adequate in October, became increasingly uncomfortable as the temperature dropped. She piled on every blanket she had and wore her coat to bed, but still woke shivering in the mornings. She didn't complain, but Quincy noticed. "Your room's not properly insulated," he said one morning after breakfast. "The walls are too thin and there's no stove. You're going to freeze when January gets here." "I'll manage," Maeve insisted, but even as she said it, she felt the baby kick as if in protest. Quincy exchanged a look with Sarah, who nodded. "John and I have been talking," Sarah said. "We want you to move into the house. We have a spare room that's not being used and it's warm and comfortable. You shouldn't be sleeping out there in that shed." "I can't take your spare room," Maeve protested. "What about guests? We hardly ever have guests, and when we do they can use the shed." Sarah's tone brooked no argument. "You're 6 months pregnant, Maeve. The cold isn't good for you or the baby. We're moving you into the house today." It was decided before Maeve could form another objection. Quincy and 2 other ranch hands carried her few belongings to the spare room in the main house. A cozy space with a real bed, a wood stove, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the corrals. Sarah had already made up the bed with clean sheets and a thick quilt, and there was a vase of dried flowers on the dresser. "This is too much," Maeve said, overwhelmed by the generosity. "I don't deserve this." "Stop saying that," Sarah said firmly. "You deserve warmth and comfort just like anyone else. Now settle in and don't argue." That night, lying in an actual bed with a warm fire in the stove and thick walls blocking the wind, Maeve felt tears slip down her cheeks. These people who had been strangers 2 months ago were treating her better than her own family had. They had given her shelter, work, friendship, and now this comfortable room. She didn't know how she would ever repay them. The next morning she was helping Sarah prepare breakfast when Quincy came into the kitchen carrying an armload of wood for the stove. His eyes went to Maeve immediately. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in weeks," she admitted. "That bed is like sleeping on a cloud." "Good." He smiled at her, and Maeve felt that now familiar flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the baby. "You look better. Less tired." "That's because she's finally getting proper rest," Sarah said. "Which reminds me, Quincy, you need to move back to the bunkhouse. There's no reason for you to keep sleeping in the barn now that Maeve's in the house." "I don't mind the barn." "Well, I mind you getting sick because you're too stubborn to sleep in a proper bed. Move back to the bunkhouse today," Quincy grinned. "Yes, madam." After he left, Sarah turned to Maeve. "That young man slept in the barn for 2 months to make you feel safe. I hope you know how rare that kind of consideration is." "I do know." Maeve's voice was soft. "I'm not sure what I did to deserve his attention." "You don't have to do anything to deserve basic human decency." "But I will say that Quincy doesn't go out of his way for just anyone. He likes you. He said we're friends." "Hum." Sarah's tone was knowing. "And sometimes friendships turn into something more when the time is right." "It's too soon for that," Maeve said, but even as she spoke the words, she wondered if she meant them. Thomas had been dead for 3 months now. She still loved him, still grieved for him, but the sharp edge of that grief was starting to dull. And in the spaces where the grief receded, something else was growing. Something that felt like hope, like possibility, like the beginning of healing. Christmas approached, and the ranch took on a festive air despite the harsh winter weather. Sarah recruited Maeve to help make cookies and cakes, and John brought home a small pine tree that they decorated with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments. The ranch hands drew names for a gift exchange, and there was talk of a dance in Trinidad on Christmas Eve. "You should come with us," Sarah urged. "It would do you good to get out and socialize." But Maeve declined. The thought of facing the townspeople, of answering questions about her situation and enduring their pity or judgment was more than she could bear. Instead, she stayed at the ranch on Christmas Eve, sitting by the fire and reading while the others went to town. She was startled when the front door opened and Quincy came in, stamping snow from his boots. "I thought you went to the dance," she said. "I was planning to, but then I thought about you here alone on Christmas Eve and it didn't seem right." He held up a wrapped package. "Besides, I wanted to give you this." "Quincy, you didn't have to get me anything. I know, but I wanted to." He handed her the package, then sat in the chair across from her. Maeve unwrapped it carefully, not wanting to tear the brown paper. Inside was a beautifully carved wooden box, its lid inlaid with a design of flowers and vines. When she opened it, she found it lined with soft fabric. "It's for the baby's things," Quincy explained. "Clothes, blankets, whatever you need to keep organized. My father taught me woodworking, and I've been working on this in the evenings for the past few weeks." Maeve ran her fingers over the smooth wood, marveling at the craftsmanship. "This is beautiful. You made this." "I did. I hope you like it." "I love it." She looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "This is the most thoughtful gift anyone's ever given me. Thank you." "You're welcome." He looked pleased but also slightly embarrassed by her reaction. "I have something else too, but it's outside. Want to see?" Curious, Maeve pulled on her coat and followed him out into the snowy night. He led her around to the side of the house where the shed she'd first lived in stood dark and empty. But when he opened the door and lit a lantern, she saw it had been transformed. The room was now properly insulated, with fresh planks covering the walls and a small wood stove installed in one corner. There was a larger bed than the cot she'd had before, a rocking chair, a dresser, and a cradle that matched the wooden box he'd given her. "I've been working on this for the past month," Quincy said. "Thought maybe once the baby comes, you might want your own space again instead of being in the main house. This way you'd have a proper room, warm and comfortable with everything you need. It's yours if you want it." Maeve stood in the doorway, speechless. He had done all this for her, spent hours of his own time building furniture and insulating walls, thinking ahead to what she would need months from now. The care and thought behind it overwhelmed her. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do all this?" Quincy set down the lantern and turned to face her. "Because I care about you, Maeve. I know it's too soon. I know you're still grieving your husband, and I'm not trying to rush you into anything. But I want you to know that you matter to me. Your happiness matters. Your future matters. And if I can do something to make that future a little easier, a little more secure, then I'm going to do it." "Quincy, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Just know that you're not alone and you're not a burden. You have people here who care about you." She crossed the small room and stood in front of him, looking up into his kind, earnest face. "I care about you too," she said quietly. "I probably shouldn't yet, but I do. You've been so good to me, so patient and kind. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me." His hand came up, hovering near her face as if he wanted to touch her but wasn't sure if he should. "Can I tell you something?" "Yes." "Every morning I wake up and the first thing I think about is whether I'll see you at breakfast. Every evening when I'm done working, I look for you. When something good happens, you're the one I want to tell. When something's hard, you're the one I want to talk to. I know we've only known each other a few months, but it feels like longer. It feels like you've always been here." Maeve's heart was racing. She knew she should step back, should remind them both that she was still in mourning, that proper society would condemn anything that happened between them this soon after her husband's death. But she was tired of doing what proper society expected. Proper society had turned her away when she needed help. This man, this good and decent man, had given her everything. "I think about you too," she confessed. "More than I should." And I feel guilty about it because I still love Thomas. I still miss him. But when I'm with you, I feel like maybe I can have a future after all. Like maybe there's still good things waiting for me in this life." "There are good things waiting," Quincy said. "I promise you that." They stood close together in the warm little room he'd built, snow falling softly outside the window, and something shifted between them. It wasn't a kiss, not yet. That would come later when the time was right. But it was an understanding, an acknowledgement that what was growing between them was real and worth nurturing. "Merry Christmas, Maeve," Quincy said softly. "Merry Christmas, Quincy." They walked back to the main house together, and when they reached the door, Quincy squeezed her hand gently before heading to the bunkhouse. Maeve went to her room and lay in bed, her hand resting on her belly where the baby turned and kicked. Her life had changed so much in 3 months. She'd lost everything and found something new. She'd been cast out and taken in. She'd grieved and begun to heal, and she'd found Quincy Dalton, a cowboy with rough hands and a gentle heart who built her a room and told her to stay as long as she needed. Who saw her not as a burden or a charity case, but as someone worth caring for. Who made her believe that maybe, just maybe, she could be happy again. January brought brutal cold and heavy snows that sometimes kept everyone confined to the buildings for days at a time. Maeve's belly grew large and round, and simple tasks became challenging. Sarah insisted she rest more, but Maeve chafed at the inactivity. She was used to working, to being useful, and sitting idle made her feel guilty. "Your job right now is to grow that baby healthy and strong," Sarah told her firmly. "The dishes will still be here after you've rested." Quincy came to visit her in the main house on the coldest days, when the ranch hands couldn't work outside. He taught her to play chess using a set John had carved years ago, and they spent hours by the fire moving pieces across the checkered board. Maeve discovered she had a talent for strategy, and she won almost as often as she lost. "You're a dangerous opponent," Quincy said after she checkmated him for the 3rd game in a row. "I'll have to step up my game." "You're letting me win," she accused. "I am not. You're just good at this." He reset the board. Another round. They played until the light faded and Sarah called them for supper. Afterward, Quincy walked Maeve to her room, a ritual they'd fallen into over the past weeks. They stood in the hallway outside her door, reluctant to say goodnight. "Only about 2 months until the baby comes," Quincy said. "Are you scared?" "Terrified," Maeve admitted. "I've never done this before. What if something goes wrong? What if I'm not a good mother?" "You'll be a wonderful mother. I've seen how you are with the ranch children when their families visit. You're patient and kind and you actually listen to them. That's different from raising a baby." "Maybe, but the important parts are the same." He reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "And you won't be alone. Sarah's delivered half the babies in this county. She'll help you through it. Will you be here?" The question came out before Maeve could stop it. "When the baby comes, if you want me to be, wild horses couldn't drag me away." She squeezed his hand. "I want you to be here. Then I will be." They stood there in the quiet hallway, hands clasped, until John's voice called from the living room asking if anyone wanted to play cards. They broke apart reluctantly, and Maeve went to her room while Quincy joined the card game. But later, lying in bed, Maeve thought about the way his hand had felt in hers, strong and warm and steady. She thought about the promise in his voice when he said he'd be there. And she thought about how somewhere along the way, Quincy Dalton had become more important to her than she'd ever intended. February arrived with slightly warmer temperatures, and the first hints that winter wouldn't last forever. The snow began to melt, creating rivers of mud that made traveling difficult. Maeve's back ached constantly now, and the baby's movements sometimes took her breath away. Sarah made her drink raspberry leaf tea and walk around the house every day to keep her strength up. Walking helps with the labor, Sarah explained. And the tea tones your womb. You'll thank me when the time comes. Maeve didn't argue. Sarah had delivered enough babies to know what she was talking about. But she was increasingly uncomfortable, increasingly anxious. The baby was due any day now, and she felt completely unprepared despite all the preparations. Quincy seemed to sense her anxiety. He came by every evening after supper, sometimes to play chess but more often just to talk. He told her stories about his childhood in Kansas, about learning to rope cattle and break horses, about the early days on the ranch when they were just getting established. He made her laugh with accounts of mishaps and near disasters, and he listened when she talked about Thomas, about the life they'd planned, about her fears for the future. "I don't want to forget him," she said one evening, her hands resting on her belly, "but I'm starting to." Little things at first. The exact sound of his laugh, the way he liked his coffee, it's like he's fading and I don't know how to stop it. "You don't stop it," Quincy said gently. "Memory isn't about holding every detail, it's about keeping the important things, the way he made you feel. The love you shared, that doesn't fade. How do you remember Emily?" He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I remember that she loved wildflowers and used to pick them even in winter. I remember her laugh sounded like music. I remember feeling like I could do anything as long as she believed in me. The rest doesn't matter. Do you still love her?" "Part of me will always love her. She was my first love and that's special, but I'm not in love with her anymore. That changed a while ago." His eyes met Maeve's. "My heart had room for someone new." The implication was clear, but before Maeve could respond, Sarah appeared in the doorway. "Maeve, are you feeling all right? You look flushed." "I'm fine, just a little warm." But an hour later, Maeve felt the first contraction. It was mild, just a tightening across her belly, but Sarah recognized it immediately. "The baby's coming. We need to get you to bed and prepare." The next 12 hours were the longest of Maeve's life. The contractions came stronger and closer together, waves of pain that left her gasping. Sarah stayed by her side the entire time, coaching her through each contraction, offering water and cool cloths for her forehead. And Quincy, true to his word, didn't leave. He stayed in the hallway outside her room, pacing and waiting, refusing to eat or rest. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, Maeve heard the thin wail of a baby crying. Sarah bundled the infant in a blanket and placed him in Maeve's arms. "You have a son," she said with a tired smile. "A healthy, perfect little boy." Maeve looked down at her son, overwhelmed by love and relief and exhaustion. He had dark hair like Thomas, but his eyes, when they opened, were a clear blue-gray. He was beautiful and terrifying and completely hers. "Does he have a name?" Sarah asked. "Matthew," Maeve said. "Matthew Thomas Norton." There was a soft knock on the door and Quincy peered in hesitantly. "Can I come in?" "Come meet Matthew," Maeve said. He approached the bed slowly, his eyes on the baby. When he looked at Matthew, his expression softened into something Maeve couldn't quite name. Wonder, maybe. Tenderness. "He's perfect," Quincy said quietly. "You did good, Maeve." "We did good," Sarah corrected. "Now both of you need to rest. John's outside ready to spread the news, and by tomorrow everyone in Trinidad will know about the newest addition to the Rockingham." But before she left, Sarah squeezed Maeve's shoulder. "You're a mother now. Everything changes from here." She was right. Everything did change. The first weeks with Matthew were exhausting and wonderful and terrifying in equal measure. He cried often, ate constantly, and slept in unpredictable bursts. Maeve moved into the renovated room Quincy had built because it gave her more privacy and space for the baby's things. The cradle Quincy had made rocked gently beside her bed. And the wooden box he'd given her for Christmas held Matthew's small clothes and blankets. Quincy came by every day to check on them. He brought firewood for the stove, food from the main house, and on one memorable occasion, a small wooden rattle he'd carved for Matthew. He never presumed, never acted like he had any right to be there, but his presence was constant and comforting. One evening in March, when Matthew was 3 weeks old, Maeve was rocking him to sleep when Quincy knocked on the door. "Come in," she called softly. He entered, removing his hat. "Sorry to bother you. I just wanted to make sure you had enough wood for the night." "We're fine, thank you." She looked down at the baby in her arms, then up at Quincy. "Do you want to hold him?" Quincy's eyes widened. "I don't want to wake him. He's asleep. He won't wake up." She stood and carefully transferred Matthew to Quincy's arms, showing him how to support the baby's head. Quincy held Matthew like he was made of glass, his rough cowboy hands impossibly gentle. He looked down at the sleeping infant with an expression of such tenderness that Maeve felt her throat tighten. This was the man who had given her shelter when she had nowhere to go, who had built her a room and told her to stay as long as she needed, who had been patient and kind and steadfast through everything. "I'm falling in love with you," she said quietly. The words came out without permission, but once spoken, she didn't want to take them back. Quincy's eyes snapped to hers. "Maeve, I know it hasn't been very long since Thomas died. I know people would say it's too soon, but I can't help how I feel. You've been there for me through everything. You've given me so much and asked for nothing in return. You're kind and generous and good, and when I look at you, I see a future I thought I'd lost." "I'm in love with you too," Quincy said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have been for a while now, but I didn't want to say anything, didn't want to pressure you." "You're not pressuring me. I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you." He looked down at Matthew, still sleeping peacefully in his arms, then back at Maeve. "What about him? His father?" "His father is dead and nothing can change that, but Matthew needs someone to be there for him, someone strong and good and patient. Someone like you. I'm not his father. No, but you could be something almost as good if you want to be." Quincy gently placed Matthew back in the cradle, then crossed to where Maeve stood. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch tender. "I want to be whatever you need me to be. I want to help you raise this boy. I want to build a life with you. But are you sure? Really sure?" "I'm sure." And she was. Thomas would always be her first love, always hold a place in her heart. But he was gone, and Quincy was here, solid and real and offering her everything she'd thought she lost. He kissed her then, soft and sweet, a promise of things to come. When they broke apart, they were both smiling. "So what happens now?" Maeve asked. "Now we figure it out together." Quincy took her hand. "I'll talk to John about building us a proper house, something bigger than this room. We can get married whenever you're ready, whenever it feels right. And I'll help you raise Matthew like he's my own son, because in every way that matters, he will be. You do that. Take on another man's child. I do that for you, and for him." He looked at the sleeping baby. "He deserves a father who'll be there for him. I can be that." Maeve felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were happy tears this time. After months of grief and fear and uncertainty, she finally had something to look forward to. A future with a good man. A home for her son. A second chance at happiness. The next few months passed in a blur of activity. Quincy spoke to John and Sarah about his intentions, and they were delighted. "We were hoping this would happen," Sarah admitted. "You two are perfect for each other." Quincy and several other ranch hands began building a small house on a piece of land John gave them as a wedding gift. It wasn't large, just 3 rooms and a porch, but it was solid and well built, with large windows that let in plenty of light. Maeve helped plan the layout, and Quincy incorporated her suggestions into the design. They argued good-naturedly about whether the kitchen should be on the east or west side, and Quincy gave in with a laugh when she made a particularly good argument for east. "You always win our debates," he teased. "Only because I'm right," she shot back, and he kissed her to show there were no hard feelings. They were married on a warm day in May, 5 months after Matthew was born. The ceremony was small, just the ranch hands and a few families from Trinidad who had become friends. Maeve wore a simple blue dress that Sarah had helped her make, and Quincy wore his best clothes, his hair neatly combed. Father O'Brien, the same priest whose church Maeve had knocked on that desperate night in October, performed the ceremony. "Do you, Quincy Dalton, take Maeve Norton to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward?" "I do," Quincy said, his eyes never leaving Maeve's face. "And do you, Maeve Norton, take Quincy Dalton to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward?" "I do," Maeve said, her voice steady and sure. "Then, by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Quincy kissed her gently, mindful of their audience but with enough warmth to make Maeve's toes curl in her boots. The small gathering cheered, and Matthew, who Sarah was holding, let out a cry as if joining in the celebration. They moved into their new house that evening. It smelled of fresh lumber and paint, and everything was new and clean. Quincy carried Maeve over the threshold, then went back for Matthew. They stood in the middle of their living room, the three of them together, and Maeve felt a sense of rightness settle over her. "Welcome home," Quincy said. "Welcome home," Maeve echoed. They settled into married life with surprising ease. Quincy continued working at the Rocking M, but now he came home to Maeve and Matthew each evening. They ate dinner together, played with the baby, and talked about their days. Maeve kept house and helped Sarah when she could, and she was happy in a way she hadn't expected to be again so soon. "You're different now," Sarah observed one afternoon when Maeve brought Matthew to visit. "Lighter somehow." "I feel lighter," Maeve admitted. "I still miss Thomas sometimes, especially when I look at Matthew and see his eyes or the shape of his nose. But the grief doesn't weigh me down anymore. I can carry it and still move forward." "That's because you've allowed yourself to heal, and you found a good man to help you do it." It was true. Quincy was everything Maeve could have hoped for in a husband. He was patient with her when she had moments of sadness or doubt. He was wonderful with Matthew, treating the boy like his own son from the very beginning. He made her laugh with his dry humor and comforted her when she cried. And he loved her with a steady, reliable love that felt like coming home. That summer, they planted a garden behind their house, and Maeve discovered she had a talent for growing things. Vegetables flourished under her care, and by September they had enough produce to preserve for the winter. Quincy built her shelves in the small pantry, and she lined them with jars of tomatoes, beans, pickles, and preserves. Matthew grew strong and healthy. He learned to smile, to laugh, to roll over. By his first birthday in February of 1883, he was pulling himself up on furniture and babbling constantly. Quincy taught him to clap his hands and play simple games. He built him toys and sang him songs and walked the floor with him when he was fussy. No one watching them together would have guessed Quincy wasn't Matthew's biological father, but they never hid the truth. When Matthew was old enough to understand, they planned to tell him about Thomas, about the man who had loved his mother and died before he could meet his son. But they would also make sure he knew that Quincy had chosen to be his father, had raised him and loved him not out of obligation, but out of genuine affection. In the spring of 1884, Maeve discovered she was pregnant again. She told Quincy one evening after Matthew was asleep, nervous about his reaction. What if he felt like she was being careless? What if he worried about having enough money to support a larger family? but Quincy's face split into a huge grin. "Really? We're having a baby, really?" Maeve smiled at his enthusiasm. "Are you happy?" Happy doesn't even begin to cover it. He pulled her into his arms, careful of her belly. "Matthew will have a brother or sister. We'll be a bigger family. This is wonderful. You don't think it's too soon? I think it's perfect timing." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I love you, Maeve Dalton, and I'm going to love this baby just as much as I love you and Matthew." Their daughter was born in December, just as the first snow began to fall. The labor was easier this time, shorter and less frightening because Maeve knew what to expect. When Sarah placed the baby in her arms, Maeve looked down at a tiny face framed by wisps of blonde hair. "What will you name her?" Sarah asked. Maeve looked at Quincy, who had been present for the entire birth this time, holding her hand through the contractions. "What about Emily? After your first love," Quincy's eyes filled with tears. "You do that. She was important to you. She helped make you the man you are. I think it would be fitting." So they named their daughter Emily Grace Dalton, and Quincy held her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Matthew, now almost 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister. He wanted to touch her constantly, to give her his toys, to help take care of her. "Gentle," Maeve reminded him over and over. "Baby sister is little. We have to be gentle." They were a family now, complete and whole. Maeve sometimes thought about the desperate woman she'd been 2 years ago, standing outside the church in Trinidad with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. She thought about the fear and despair that had nearly consumed her. And then she looked at her husband, her children, the home they'd built together, and she marveled at how much life could change. One evening in the summer of 1885, Maeve and Quincy sat on their porch watching Matthew play in the yard while Emily napped inside. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and the air was warm and sweet with the smell of growing things. "You ever regret it?" Maeve asked quietly. "Taking me in that night, taking on Matthew, all of this?" Quincy looked at her with such love in his eyes that it took her breath away. "Not for 1 second. That night I met you was the luckiest night of my life. You and Matthew and Emily, you're my whole world. I'd do it all again 1,000 times. Even building that room in the middle of winter." He laughed. "Even that, though I'm glad we have an actual house now." Maeve leaned against his shoulder, feeling his arm come around her. "I love you, Quincy Dalton." "I love you too, Maeve Dalton. Always have, always will." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink below the mountains and the first stars appear. Matthew ran to them, tired from playing, and climbed into Quincy's lap. Quincy held him close, and Maeve thought about how this was everything she'd dreamed of when she was young. A loving husband, beautiful children, a home filled with warmth and laughter. She'd lost it once when Thomas died, thought she'd never have it again. But life had given her a second chance in the form of a kind cowboy who built her a room and told her to stay as long as she needed. She'd stayed. She'd made a life, and she was happier than she'd ever imagined possible. The years passed peacefully. Matthew grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved horses and wanted to be a cowboy like his father. Emily was quieter but curious, always asking questions and wanting to understand how things worked. In 1887, Maeve gave birth to another son, whom they named John after the ranch owner who had given them their first real chance. And in 1889, their fourth child arrived, a daughter they named Sarah in honor of the woman who had become like a mother to Maeve. Their little house became crowded, so Quincy added on 2 more rooms. The ranch prospered, and John gave Quincy more responsibility and better pay. They weren't rich, but they were comfortable. They had enough food on the table, clothes for the children, and a warm home. They had friends and community and purpose. Maeve never heard from Catherine Norton again. She'd heard through the Trinidad gossip network that the old woman had died in 1886, alone except for her servants. Maeve felt a twinge of sadness for her, but mostly she felt grateful that Catherine's cruelty had led her to Trinidad, to Quincy, to this life. On their 10th wedding anniversary in May of 1893, Quincy surprised Maeve with a trip to Trinidad, just the two of them. Sarah and John agreed to watch the children for the night, and Quincy and Maeve stayed at the hotel and had dinner at the nicest restaurant in town. "Do you remember the first time we came to Trinidad together?" Quincy asked over dessert. "You were so scared and trying so hard to hide it." "I remember thinking I'd reached the absolute lowest point of my life," Maeve said. "I had nothing and no one. And then you appeared and offered to help, and I thought you must be crazy or have ulterior motives. Did I prove you wrong? You proved me very wrong." She reached across the table to take his hand. "You gave me everything, Quincy. A home, a family, love, security, happiness. I can never repay you for that. You don't need to repay me. You gave me just as much. Before I met you, I was just going through the motions. Working, eating, sleeping, but not really living. You and the children gave me purpose. You made me whole." They walked back to the hotel hand in hand, and that night they made love with the slow, familiar passion of a long marriage. Afterward, lying in Quincy's arms, Maeve thought about the journey that had brought them here. The loss and grief, the fear and desperation, the kindness of strangers who became family, the slow building of trust and affection into something deeper. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For building me that room. For telling me to stay as long as I needed. For being patient with me while I healed. For loving my son. For giving me more children. For building this life with me. For everything." Quincy kissed her temple. "You don't need to thank me for loving you, Maeve. It's the easiest thing I've ever done." They returned to the ranch the next day to find their children excited to see them and full of stories about their adventures with Uncle John and Aunt Sarah. Matthew, now 11, had helped with the horses. Emily, 8, had learned a new song. John Jr., 6, had caught a frog. And little Sarah, 4, had baked cookies with her namesake. "Did you have fun?" Matthew asked his parents. "We had a wonderful time," Maeve assured him, "but we're happy to be home with all of you," and it was true. The hotel had been nice. The dinner had been lovely, but nothing compared to the joy of being home with their family. This was what Maeve had been searching for all along, even when she didn't know it. Not grand adventures or great wealth, but simple happiness. Love and laughter and the everyday moments that made up a life. The children grew and changed. Matthew became a skilled horseman and started working officially on the Rockingham at 15. Emily discovered a love of reading and begged her parents for every book they could afford. John Jr. was mechanically minded, always taking things apart to see how they worked. And Sarah was gentle and nurturing, already helping care for the younger children in the families that worked on the ranch. In 1895, when Matthew was 13, he asked Quincy a question that they'd been preparing for. "Pa, why don't I look like you? I look like Ma, but not like you." Quincy and Maeve exchanged glances. They'd always planned to tell him the truth when he was old enough to understand. "That's because I'm not your blood father," Quincy said gently. "Your real father was a man named Thomas Norton. He died before you were born." Matthew's eyes widened. "You're not my real father. I'm your real father in every way that matters," Quincy said firmly. "I've raised you since you were a baby. I've loved you and cared for you and taught you everything I know. Blood doesn't make a family, Matthew. Love does. Did you know him, my blood father, a little? He was a good man from what I remember. He loved your mother very much, and he would have loved you if he'd had the chance to meet you." Matthew was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Then he asked, "Does this mean I'm a Norton, not a Dalton?" "You're whatever you want to be," Maeve said. "You were born Matthew Thomas Norton, but Quincy adopted you legally when we got married. You're a Dalton in the eyes of the law and in our hearts. But if people find out, then they find out," Quincy said. "We've never hidden the truth, Matthew. Anyone who's been around since you were born knows the story, and if anyone tries to make you feel less than because of it, they'll have to answer to me." Matthew looked between his parents, then at Quincy. "You chose to be my father, even though you didn't have to." "I chose you," Quincy confirmed, "and I'd choose you again every single day." Matthew nodded slowly. "Then I want to be a Dalton, because you're my pa no matter what anyone says." Quincy pulled his son into a fierce hug, and Maeve saw tears in his eyes. "I'm proud of you, son. So proud of the young man you're becoming." After that conversation, something settled in Matthew. He'd always been a good boy, but now he had a new confidence, a sureness about his place in the family. He wore the name Dalton with pride and told anyone who asked that Quincy was his father in every way that mattered. The years continued to pass in a steady rhythm. There were hard times, harsh winters, sick children, lean years when the cattle prices dropped. But there were far more good times. Birthdays and holidays, Sunday dinners with the extended ranch family, summer picnics by the river, winter nights gathered around the fire telling stories. In 1900, Matthew married a girl from Trinidad named Annie. They built a small house on the Rocking M, not far from Quincy and Maeve's place. Emily, at 16, was being courted by a young man who worked at the general store. John Jr., now 13, was learning carpentry from Quincy. And Sarah, 11, helped Maeve manage their ever-expanding vegetable garden. John and Sarah Mitchell retired in 1902, turning the ranch over to their son and his wife. But they stayed in the area, and they remained close to Quincy and Maeve's family. "You two are the best thing that ever happened to this ranch," John told them at his retirement party. "You came here with nothing and built something beautiful." "You gave us a chance when no one else would," Quincy replied. "We'll never forget that." By 1905, Quincy and Maeve were grandparents. Matthew and Annie had 2 children, and Emily had married her store clerk, and they had a baby on the way. The house that had once seemed so large now felt crowded when all the family gathered for Sunday dinner. "We might need to build another addition," Quincy joked as children ran through the rooms and adults crowded around the table. "Or we could just enjoy the chaos," Maeve suggested, watching her grandchildren play with a smile on her face. On a warm evening in June 1907, Maeve sat on the porch of their home, now expanded to 8 rooms with additions Quincy had built over the years. She was 50 years old, her hair streaked with gray, her hands weathered from years of work. But she was happy, deeply and contentedly happy. Quincy came out to join her, moving a bit slower these days due to an old injury from breaking horses. He settled into the chair beside her with a contented sigh. "Peaceful tonight. The children are all at their own homes for once." Maeve smiled. "Strange how quiet it is without them." "Do you miss it, when they were little and the house was full of noise?" "Sometimes. But I also love this, just the 2 of us. We don't get enough quiet evenings anymore." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set behind the mountains. 25 years had passed since that desperate October night when Maeve had arrived in Trinidad with nowhere to go. 25 years of love and laughter, struggle and triumph, loss and gain. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Maeve asked. "If Catherine hadn't turned me away, if you hadn't been in town that night, if you hadn't offered to help all the time," Quincy admitted. And I thank God every day that things happened exactly the way they did, because otherwise I wouldn't have you. We wouldn't have this family, this life, all these memories. I was so scared that night. I thought my life was over. In a way it was, but it was also beginning. You just didn't know it yet. Maeve reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. His hand was rough and calloused from years of ranch work, but to her, it was the most beautiful hand in the world. This was the hand that had helped her down from a horse on a dark October night. The hand that had built her a room and told her to stay as long as she needed. The hand that had held hers through childbirth and illness and all the ups and downs of life. The hand that had held their children, built their home, and written the story of their life together. "I love you," she said, the words as true now as they'd been on their wedding day 22 years ago. "I will always love you." "I love you too," Quincy replied, squeezing her hand. "You're my heart, Maeve, my home, my everything." They watched the last light fade from the sky, the stars beginning to emerge one by one. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The wind rustled through the cottonwoods. And Maeve Dalton, formerly Maeve Norton, who had once been a pregnant widow with nowhere to turn and nothing to her name, looked at her life and found it good. She had been cast out, but she had been taken in. She had lost everything, but she had gained so much more. She had known grief and despair, but she had also known great joy and deep love. And it had all started with a kind cowboy who saw a desperate woman and decided to help, who built her a room in a barn and told her to stay as long as she needed. She had stayed. She had built a life, and she had never, for one single day, regretted that decision. As they sat together in the gathering darkness, Quincy began to hum a tune on his harmonica, the same mournful melody he'd been playing that night when she'd first heard him making music under the stars. But now it didn't sound sad. It sounded like home. It sounded like love. It sounded like everything they'd built together over 25 years of marriage and partnership and devotion. "That song doesn't sound lonely anymore," Maeve observed. "That's because I'm not lonely anymore," Quincy said simply. "Haven't been since the day I met you." They sat on their porch until the moon rose high in the sky, content in each other's presence, grateful for the journey that had brought them together, and looking forward to whatever years remained to them. They had children and grandchildren to love. They had work that mattered and a community that valued them. They had each other, and in the end, that was more than enough. That was everything. In 1910, they celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with a large party attended by half of Trinidad. Matthew gave a speech about his father's kindness and his mother's strength. Emily sang a song she'd written especially for them. John Jr. presented them with a beautifully carved wooden plaque that read, "The Dalton Family, Founded in Love, 1883. And Sarah organized all the grandchildren to recite a poem about family. 25 years, Quincy said in his response speech, his arm around Maeve's waist. 25 years since I took the biggest chance of my life and asked a desperate woman if she needed help. I didn't know then that she would become my wife, the mother of my children, my partner in everything. I didn't know that helping her would be the best decision I ever made. But I'm grateful every single day that I had the courage to speak up that night, and that she had the courage to accept my help." Maeve wiped tears from her eyes as the crowd applauded. "And I'm grateful that there are still good people in this world. People like Quincy, like John and Sarah Mitchell, like all of you who have become our family over the years. I came to Trinidad 28 years ago with nothing but a carpet bag and a baby on the way. I was terrified and alone and certain my life was over. But this community, this family we've built, proved me wrong. You showed me that endings can be beginnings, that loss can lead to love, and that sometimes the darkest moments come right before the dawn. The party went late into the night, with music and dancing and storytelling. Maeve danced with Quincy, with her sons, with her grandsons. She watched her family and friends celebrate, and she felt a profound sense of gratitude for the life she'd been given. Not the life she'd planned when she married Thomas all those years ago, but a good life nonetheless. A better life than she could have imagined in those desperate days after his death. As the party wound down and guests began to depart, Maeve and Quincy stood on their porch saying goodbye. When the last wagon had rolled away and the house was quiet again, they remained outside, reluctant to let the evening end. 25 years, Maeve mused. It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. We've built something good here, Quincy said. Something worth celebrating. We have. Maeve looked at the house they'd expanded over the years, at the barn where Quincy still kept his horses, at the garden where she grew vegetables and flowers, at the little road that led to Matthew's house and connected them to the larger ranch. This is home. Real home in a way nowhere else has ever been. That's because home isn't a place, Quincy said. It's people. It's love. It's the life you build together. They went inside eventually, banking the fire and checking that everything was secure for the night. In their bedroom, Maeve unpinned her hair while Quincy removed his boots. They'd shared this room, this bed, for 25 years. They knew each other's habits and rhythms as well as they knew their own. It was comfortable and familiar and deeply satisfying. "What are you thinking about?" Quincy asked as they settled into bed. "About that first night in the shed behind the barn. How cold I was, how scared, how I couldn't imagine ever feeling safe or happy again. And now I'm lying in a warm bed next to the man I love, in a house full of memories, surrounded by family. I'm not scared anymore. Haven't been in a very long time." Quincy pulled her close, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. This heart that had chosen her, that had opened to include Matthew, that had loved their children and grandchildren with unwavering devotion. This heart that was hers, as surely as her own heart was his. "Thank you for building me that room," she whispered. "For telling me to stay as long as I needed." "Thank you for staying," he replied. "For building this life with me, for loving me, for being my partner in everything." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, content and at peace. And if Maeve dreamed that night, she dreamed of beginnings rather than endings, of second chances and new possibilities, of a kind cowboy who had looked at a desperate widow and seen not a burden but a future. The future they'd built together, one day at a time, one small act of kindness at a time, one moment of love at a time. A future that had turned into a lifetime, and a lifetime that had been, without question, well lived. Years continued to accumulate like coins in a bank, and the Dalton family continued to grow. More grandchildren arrived, and then great-grandchildren. Matthew took over more responsibility on the ranch as Quincy's body began to slow down. Emily's husband inherited the general store, and they prospered in town. John Jr. became a sought-after carpenter, building houses all over Trinidad and the surrounding area. And Sarah, the youngest, became a teacher, educating the children of the families who worked the ranches in the area. In 1915, Quincy and Maeve celebrated their 30th anniversary more quietly, just with their immediate family. Quincy was 62 now, still strong but showing his age. Maeve was 58, her hair completely gray, her body softer than it had been in her youth. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the people they'd fallen in love with decades ago. 30 years, Matthew said, raising his glass in a toast. "To the best parents anyone could ask for, to the man who chose to be my father when he didn't have to." and to the woman who showed us all what strength really looks like. Here, here, the rest of the family chorused. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, Quincy presented Maeve with a gift. It was a wooden box, similar to the one he'd given her for Christmas 33 years ago, but larger and more elaborate. The lid was inlaid with an intricate design of a sunrise over mountains. "Open it," he urged. Inside, Maeve found letters, dozens of them tied with ribbon. "What are these?" "Letters I've been writing to you over the years. Every anniversary, every birthday, every time something happened that made me grateful we found each other. I never gave them to you before because I could just tell you how I felt. But I wanted you to have them now, so you'll always have a record of how much you meant to me." Maeve's hands shook as she untied the ribbon and opened the first letter. It was dated May 1883, their first anniversary, and it was filled with Quincy's thoughts about their first year of marriage, his hopes for the future, his love for her and Matthew. She read through tears, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of this gift. "You've been doing this for 30 years. Longer, actually. The first one is from Christmas 1882, when I gave you the first box. I've written to you every year since." Maeve threw her arms around him, this man who had been writing her love letters in secret for over 3 decades. "This is the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me." "Thank you. You've given me a lifetime of beautiful gifts," Quincy said. "Your love, your partnership, your trust. This is just a small reflection of what you mean to me." They sat together on their porch reading through the letters, reliving their life through Quincy's words. Each letter was a snapshot of a moment in time, a record of their journey together. There were letters about the births of their children, about difficult years on the ranch, about moments of joy and struggle. But every single one ended the same way. "I love you more today than yesterday, and I will love you more tomorrow than today." "It's true, you know," Quincy said when they'd read the last letter. "Every year I think I can't possibly love you more than I already do, and every year I'm proven wrong. My love for you just keeps growing." "Mine too," Maeve whispered. "I didn't think it was possible to love someone this much, but you've shown me that love has no limits, no boundaries. It just keeps expanding to fill whatever space is available." They sat on their porch until the stars came out, holding hands and remembering that first desperate night when their paths had crossed, remembering the slow building of trust and friendship, remembering the moment they'd acknowledged their feelings for each other, remembering their wedding, the births of their children, the accumulation of years and experiences that had made them who they were. "If you could go back," Quincy asked, "to that night in October 1882, knowing everything that would happen, would you change anything?" Maeve thought about it carefully. "I'd save Thomas if I could. I'd spare him that death in the mine, spare myself and Matthew the loss of him. But I wouldn't change anything else, because everything else led me here, to this porch with you, surrounded by the family we built together. And I wouldn't trade this life for anything, not even if it meant you could have Thomas back. Thomas was my first love, and I'll always be grateful for the time we had. But you're my forever love, Quincy. You're the one who showed me that life goes on after loss, that hearts can heal, that second chances exist. I love you more than I can put into words." "You don't have to put it into words," Quincy said, pulling her close. "You've shown me every day for 30 years. In the way you smile at me across the dinner table, in the way you reach for my hand when we're walking, in the way you've built this life alongside me, that's worth more than any words could ever be." The seasons continued their eternal cycle. Spring brought new calves and the first green shoots in the garden. Summer brought long days of work and warm evenings on the porch. Fall brought harvest and preparation for winter, and winter brought the family together, gathering around the fire to tell stories and make plans for the year ahead. In the spring of 1920, Quincy began to slow down significantly. His joints ached in the mornings, and he tired more easily. He finally admitted to Maeve that he was thinking about retiring from active ranch work and letting Matthew take over completely. "I'm getting old," he said with a rueful smile. "Time to let the younger generation take charge." "We're both getting old," Maeve pointed out. She was 63 now, and while she was still healthy and active, she'd also noticed the passage of time in her own body. "Maybe it's not such a bad thing. We've worked hard all our lives. We've earned some rest." They officially retired in June, passing the reins of their portion of the ranch to Matthew and Annie. But retirement didn't mean doing nothing. Quincy still helped with small repairs and mentored the younger workers. Maeve still helped with large family gatherings and looked after her ever-growing collection of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They just did it at a slower pace, with more time to enjoy each other's company. One afternoon in the summer of 1922, Maeve found Quincy in his workshop, carving something from a piece of wood. She watched him work, admiring the skill that hadn't diminished despite his age. His hands, though gnarled with arthritis, still moved with sure precision. "What are you making?" she asked. "A cradle for the new great-grandchild Matthew and Annie's daughter is expecting. Wanted to make sure all the babies in this family start out in a Dalton cradle." Maeve smiled, remembering the cradle he'd made for Matthew all those years ago. "You made a cradle for Matthew before he was even born." "I did, and I've made one for every child and grandchild since. It's my way of welcoming them to the family." "You're a good man, Quincy Dalton, the best man I've ever known." He set down his carving tools and turned to her. "I've tried to be the man you deserved, the man Emily would have wanted me to be, the man my parents raised me to be. I don't know if I've succeeded, but I've tried." "You've more than succeeded. You've been everything I needed and more than I dared to hope for." She moved to stand beside him. "Do you have any regrets? Anything you wish you'd done differently?" Quincy considered the question seriously. "I wish I'd told you I loved you sooner. I wish I hadn't waited so long to kiss you that first time. But those are small things. Overall, no, I wouldn't change our story." "It's been a good life, Maeve. The best life I could have imagined." "It has been good," Maeve agreed. "Better than good. It's been extraordinary." They stood together in his workshop, surrounded by the tools of his trade and the evidence of his craftsmanship. Outside, they could hear their great-grandchildren playing, their laughter floating on the summer breeze. Inside, it was quiet and peaceful, just the two of them in a moment of perfect contentment. In the winter of 1924, Quincy caught a cold that turned into pneumonia. Maeve nursed him carefully, just as he'd cared for her through various illnesses over the years. The doctor came regularly, and the whole family held their breath, praying for his recovery. He did recover, but he was weaker afterward. He moved more slowly, tired more easily, and sometimes seemed to be looking at things no one else could see. Maeve knew, with the certainty that comes from knowing someone for more than 40 years, that their time together was growing short. "I'm not ready to lose you," she told him one night as they lay in bed. "I'm not ready to go," he replied, "but I'm not afraid either. I've had a good life, a full life. I've loved and been loved. I've raised children who turned into good people. I've left something behind that matters. That's more than most people can say. But what will I do without you? The same thing you did before you met me. You'll survive. You'll find strength you didn't know you had. You'll keep going because that's what you do." He took her hand. "And you'll remember me, remember us. Remember the life we built together. That's all I ask." "I'll remember," Maeve promised through her tears. "Every single day I'll remember." Quincy Dalton died peacefully in his sleep on a cold February night in 1925. He was 72 years old, and he'd been married to Maeve for 42 years. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, testament to the impact he'd had on the community. Matthew gave the eulogy, speaking about his father's kindness, his integrity, his unwavering dedication to his family. "He wasn't my father by blood," Matthew said, his voice breaking with emotion. "But he was my father in every way that mattered. He chose to love me when he didn't have to. He raised me as his own. He taught me everything I know about being a good man, a good husband, a good father. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the example he set." Maeve sat in the front row, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and listened to the stories people told about Quincy. Stories about his fairness, his humor, his willingness to help anyone who needed it. Stories that painted a picture of a man who had lived his values, who had made the world a little bit better by being in it. After the funeral, after everyone had gone home, Maeve sat alone in the house she'd shared with Quincy for so many years. Everything reminded her of him. The chair where he sat to read, the workshop where he crafted furniture, the porch where they'd spent countless evenings watching the sunset, the bed they'd shared for 4 decades. She opened the wooden box he'd given her and read through his letters again, finding comfort in his words. In the last letter, written just a few months before his death, he'd written, "If you're reading this after I'm gone, know that I died happy. I got to spend my life with you, and that was the greatest gift I could have asked for. Don't grieve too long, my love. Live your life fully. Remember me with joy, not sadness, and know that whatever comes after this, I'll be waiting for you." Maeve held the letter to her chest and allowed herself to cry. She cried for the loss of the man who had been her partner, her friend, her love. She cried for all the years they'd had and all the years they wouldn't have. She cried for the empty space beside her in bed, the silence where his voice used to be, the absence of his presence. But underneath, the grief was gratitude. Gratitude for 42 years of love. Gratitude for the family they'd built together. Gratitude for every small kindness, every shared laugh, every quiet moment of companionship. Quincy had given her a life worth living, and she would honor his memory by continuing to live it fully. The months after Quincy's death were difficult. Maeve moved through her days in a fog, going through the motions but feeling disconnected from everything. Her children worried about her, but she insisted she was fine. She just needed time. Spring arrived, bringing new life to the ranch as it did every year. Maeve forced herself to plant her garden, though her heart wasn't in it. She tended the plants mechanically, watering and weeding without really seeing them. But gradually, almost without her noticing, the rhythm of the work began to soothe her. The feel of soil between her fingers, the smell of growing things, the satisfaction of seeing green shoots emerge from the earth, these things reminded her that life continued, that there was still beauty in the world even in the midst of grief. One evening in late May, Maeve sat on the porch and realized it was the 42nd anniversary of her wedding to Quincy. She'd lived with him for 42 years, loved him for even longer, and now she had to learn to live without him. She opened the box of letters and read through them all again, every single one. By the time she finished, the sun was rising and she felt wrung out but also somehow lighter. Quincy's words reminded her of all the good times, all the reasons she'd fallen in love with him, all the ways he'd enriched her life. He wouldn't want her to spend her remaining years mourning. He'd want her to live, to find joy, to appreciate the family they'd created together. So she made a decision. She would honor Quincy's memory not by withdrawing from life, but by embracing it. She would spend time with her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She would continue tending her garden, She would help out around the ranch when she could. She would live fully, just as he'd asked her to. The years that followed were quieter but still full. Maeve became the matriarch of the family, the one everyone came to for advice and comfort. She told stories about the old days, about how she and Quincy had met, about the early years of their marriage. She wanted her descendants to know where they came from, to understand the foundation of love and kindness that their family was built on. In 1930, on what would have been her and Quincy's 47th wedding anniversary, Maeve gathered the family together for a special announcement. At 73 years old, she was still sharp and active, though her body had slowed considerably. "I want to tell you all a story," she said once everyone was assembled. "A story about a desperate young woman and a kind cowboy in a room in a barn." She told them everything, even the parts she'd glossed over before. She told them about Thomas's death, about Catherine Norton's cruelty, about that terrifying night in Trinidad when she'd had nowhere to go. She told them about Quincy finding her, about his offer of help, about the shed he'd cleaned out and the supplies he'd gathered. She told them about falling in love, slowly and carefully, while grieving another man. She told them about the decision to marry, about building their house and their life together. "I want you to understand," she said, looking around at the faces of her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, "that this family started with an act of kindness. Your grandfather, your great-grandfather, saw someone in need and helped without expecting anything in return. That's the legacy I want to leave you, not money or land, though there's some of that too, but a legacy of kindness, of helping others, of building each other up instead of tearing each other down." There wasn't a dry eye in the room when she finished. Matthew, now almost 48 years old, stood and hugged his mother. "Thank you for telling us, Ma, and thank you for being strong enough to accept Pa's help all those years ago. Without that, none of us would be here." "Thank your father," Maeve said. "He's the one who had the courage to reach out to a stranger. I just had the sense to accept." That night, lying in bed, Maeve felt Quincy's presence more strongly than she had since his death. She could almost hear his voice saying, "You did good, Maeve. You told our story and you told it right." "I miss you," she whispered to the darkness. "Every single day I miss you." But she also felt gratitude. Gratitude for the time they'd had, for the love they'd shared, for the family they'd created. It hadn't been the life she'd planned when she married Thomas, but it had been a good life. A beautiful life. A life worth living. Maeve Norton Dalton died peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1932, just a few weeks after her 75th birthday. She was surrounded by family in her final days, and her last words were, "Tell Quincy I'm coming. Tell him to wait for me." Her funeral was even larger than Quincy's had been. People came from all over Colorado to pay their respects to the woman who had become a legend in the area, the widow who had been cast out but had built a new life, the mother who had raised 4 children and countless grandchildren with love and wisdom, the matriarch who had held a sprawling family together with grace and strength. Matthew, now 69 years old, gave the eulogy. "My mother taught me that endings can be beginnings," he said. "That loss can lead to love. That kindness can change lives. She came to Trinidad with nothing and left behind more than she could have imagined. She leaves behind children who loved her, grandchildren who respected her, great-grandchildren who will remember her stories. She leaves behind a garden that still blooms every spring. She leaves behind a house that still stands strong. And most of all, she leaves behind a legacy of love." They buried her next to Quincy in the small cemetery on the edge of the Rockingham Ranch. Her headstone read, "Maeve Norton Dalton, 1857–1932. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and friend. She was cast out but found home. She lost everything but gained even more. And on Quincy's headstone, Matthew had added a line. He built her a room and told her to stay as long as she needed. She stayed forever. The family continued to grow and prosper long after Maeve's death. The Rockingham Ranch stayed in the family for generations. Matthew's descendants passed down the stories of Quincy and Maeve, of how their love story had started with an act of kindness on a cold October night in 1882. The wooden cradles Quincy had made were carefully preserved and used for every new baby born into the family. The house he'd built and expanded over the years remained standing, a testament to his craftsmanship and his love. And every anniversary of Quincy and Maeve's wedding, the family gathered to remember them. They told the story of the pregnant widow who was cast out and the cowboy who built her a room and said, "Stay as long as you need." They talked about the life that had grown from that single act of kindness, the love that had blossomed from desperation and hope. It was a story worth remembering. A story of second chances and new beginnings. A story of love found in unlikely places. A story that proved that sometimes the darkest moments come right before the dawn. And most of all, a story that showed that kindness, real kindness given without expectation of return, can change not just one life but generations of lives yet to come. Maeve had been cast out, alone and afraid, with nothing but a child growing inside her and $20 to her name. But she'd found Quincy, or perhaps he'd found her, and together they'd built something beautiful. They'd built a family. They'd built a home. They'd built a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond, and that, in the end, was everything.